By the time I was 38, I had become the woman people hunted for when a launch started smoking around the edges. I worked in tech development at Quantaloom Labs, a shiny company with matte black walls, expensive coffee, and the odd belief that speed came from meetings. My speed came from cleaner logic, calmer planning, and the radical act of reading requirements before touching a keyboard. While some people built drama, I built systems. Mine usually worked. My old manager, Owen, understood that. He left me alone, trusted my estimates, and treated version control like scripture. Then the cuts came through sometime in the late afternoon, and by the next morning his badge no longer opened the glass doors. In his place came Blythe Voss, a woman with a perfect blowout, a voice sharp enough to slice laminates, and the confidence of someone who had mistaken a slide deck for wisdom. She arrived with a new program called PulseForge. According to Blythe, PulseForge would be the cornerstone of everything: planning, build approvals, code reviews, vendor tickets, team updates, risk logs, deployment flags, all of it in one towering monument to efficiency. According to the rest of us, it looked like a glittery trap built by people who had never shipped anything under pressure. The first cross-team meeting set the tone. Our infrastructure lead, Sam, asked, "Has PulseForge been tested against our current deployment pipeline?" Blythe did not even look at him. "Sam, if you have to ask that, you are already behind." Sam blinked. "I am asking because integration affects prod stability." She gave him a smile that belonged on a tax audit. "No, you are asking because engineers always panic when they are not the smartest people in the room." The room went very still. A few minutes later, Mina from QA said, "We will need a phased rollout or defect tracking will get muddy." Blythe tapped her pen. "QA often mistakes caution for intelligence. We are not dragging this through a toddler pool because testing likes floaties." Mina wrote something down with the fury of a woman engraving a grave marker. Then she turned to procurement. "Vendors will need approval on licensing terms," said Joel. "Security review too." Blythe leaned back and actually laughed. "Joel, procurement is where momentum goes to die. This has executive enthusiasm. Catch up." I sat there with my camera on and my face arranged in what I hoped looked like professionalism and not active homicide. After the meeting, my inbox filled like a drain during a storm. Team leads were rattled, questions stacked up. No migration plan, no rollback plan, no training path, no written success metric beyond Blythe saying the phrase transformational 6 times in 1 hour. I did what capable women do when chaos puts on lipstick and calls itself leadership. I started documenting everything. I logged the date of each directive. I saved the rollout notes. I preserved screenshots of changed requirements. I sent follow-up emails after every verbal instruction, clean and polite, asking Blythe to confirm decisions in writing. Never fight a bad manager with feelings when you can fight with an audit trail. My own work was still fast. Too fast, apparently. I had built internal tools that cut repetitive dev tasks, automated report generation, and flagged conflicts before they reached production. I finished projects ahead of schedule so often that people started calling me magic. I was not magic. I was organized, slightly ruthless with clutter, and unimpressed by vanity software. When Blythe called me into a one-on-one, I already knew what she wanted. "I have reviewed your velocity," she said, glancing at my dashboard like it offended her personally. "You are fast, but your methods are not visible inside PulseForge. That is a cultural issue. My methods are visible in Git, Jira, the release logs, and the completed work." She folded her hands. "That answer is exactly the problem. You are attached to legacy behavior." I smiled. "I am attached to deadlines." Her eyes narrowed. "From now on, all work flows through PulseForge, no exceptions." That was the moment I knew she was going to break something expensive and try to wear my face while doing it. So I nodded, opened a fresh folder in my drive, and named it Voss Implementation Record. Some women buy stress candles. I build evidence. PulseForge landed on our team like a grand piano dropped through a skylight. Within days, developers who usually moved like cyclists on a downhill stretch were stuck waiting for approvals that had never existed before. Code reviews now required duplicate entries in 3 tabs, plus a workflow signature from Product Ops, which was a department nobody had needed until Blythe invented a reason for them to matter. QA could not close defects without linking them to feature cards that were constantly being renamed. Infrastructure had to pause deployments because the system auto-flagged routine actions as unverified changes. In plain English, production slowed by over 40% and then kept limping. For weeks. Everyone knew why. Blythe did not. Or worse, she did and thought volume could beat arithmetic. She strutted through meetings like a woman conducting an orchestra of people trying not to scream. "We are experiencing resistance, not failure," she said during one update. Sam answered, "No, we are experiencing blocked handoffs and doubled admin time." Blythe rolled her eyes. Engineers love a sob story. Mina from QA said, "Defect closure is now taking nearly half again as long." "That is because QA was understructured before," Blythe snapped. Understructured. That was her phrase for everything she did not understand. I had begun keeping 2 sets of metrics. One was the official team dashboard. The other was my private comparison log, compiled from timestamps, ticket states, deployment records, and idle queue intervals. Before PulseForge, our average production cycle moved cleanly. After implementation, work sat stranded in bureaucratic purgatory, while deadlines crawled toward us with knives. I kept my notes clinical. Numbers do not need adjectives. Bad leaders bring their own. Then the blame started. It began subtly. In a status meeting, Blythe said, "Rena has historically been our fastest developer, so the current delays suggest uneven adaptation." Uneven adaptation. That was corporate language for let us throw one woman under the bus and call it coaching. I replied, "My output dropped after the mandatory process changes. I noted the bottlenecks in the rollout review." Blythe smiled as if I had confirmed her theory. "Exactly. Mindset." I almost admired the nerve. After that, she started copying senior directors on messages asking why my estimates had shifted. She hinted that I was resisting alignment. She suggested my automation tools created hidden dependencies. She even told product planning that I preferred shortcuts over governance, which was rich coming from a woman who had bulldozed procurement, skipped proper pilot approval, and launched a system without a rollback strategy. I did not argue in hallways. I did not perform outrage. I answered in writing. "Per your request, I am confirming that this delay followed the new approval chain introduced in PulseForge. For clarity, the ticket was ready for release before the additional review gate was added. Attached is the comparison log for cycle time before and after the new workflow." That is the thing about self-protection at work. People think it is dramatic. It is actually dull, repetitive, and glorious. Save the chat, send the recap, keep the source file, confirm the instruction. If someone changes direction, make them own the change in writing. Around early morning one day, Blythe stopped by my desk with the false brightness of a game show host. "I need you to stop undermining transformation with side metrics." I looked up from my screen. "You mean measurement." "I mean narrative control." That nearly made me laugh. Instead, I said, "The release board asked for trend data. I will tell them what they need to know." There it was. Not management, possession. I leaned back. "That is not how governance works." Her expression chilled. "Be careful, Rena." Women hear that phrase in a dozen tones over a lifetime. Sometimes it means danger. Sometimes it means someone has noticed you are harder to corner than expected. By then, upper management had begun circling. Delays were landing where delays always land, at the polished shoes of people with budget authority. Revenue forecasts shifted. A client renewal got tense. Someone in finance started asking how a costly new platform had managed to make delivery worse. Blythe doubled down. At the next operations review, in front of directors from engineering, finance, and product, she said, "The core issue is execution inconsistency at the contributor level." Then she looked right at me. That was the moment I stopped merely protecting myself. I decided to bury her with documentation. I did not set out to become the patron saint of receipts. Life simply kept rewarding the habit. Once Blythe made me the public explanation for her private incompetence, I stopped thinking like a developer with a difficult boss and started thinking like a witness with exhibits. If she wanted a story, I would provide a better one. With timestamps. I built a clean evidence set. Not a dramatic folder stuffed with emotional commentary. A disciplined record that any executive, auditor, or decent attorney would respect. Meeting notes, Slack exports, approval chain changes, ticket histories, release timing comparisons, procurement objections, QA warnings, integration concerns. A version summary of recommendations the team had made before rollout, and Blythe had dismissed with the elegance of a wrecking ball in heels. I also included her words when I had them in writing. Resistance is not risk. We do not need phased adoption. Narrative control matters more than side metrics. That last one was my favorite. Villains should always monologue, it saves paperwork. Meanwhile, production continued crawling. We missed a delivery target for a client feature that should have been routine. Sales got twitchy. Finance got louder. A vice president named Celia Hart requested a small meeting with me, Sam, Mina, and Blythe, sometime in the early afternoon. Celia had the calm face of a woman who had cleaned up expensive messes before breakfast. She opened with no pleasantries. "I want direct answers," she said. "Why are cycle times down so sharply?" Blythe jumped in. "There has been uneven compliance and cultural drag." Celia held up one finger without looking at her. "Rena." I had prepared for this moment so thoroughly that my pulse actually slowed. "The delays track directly to the PulseForge rollout," I said. "I have pre- and post-implementation metrics, written concerns from infrastructure and QA, and the process changes that added duplicate approvals without operational value. We did not run a pilot. We did not define success criteria beyond adoption. We did not preserve an efficient fallback path. The system is not inherently unusable, but this implementation was coercive, poorly sequenced, and dismissive of functional expertise." Silence. Then Sam said, "That is accurate." Mina added, "I raised defect tracking concerns before launch. They were rejected." Blythe tried to laugh. "This is coordinated defensiveness." I slid a printed packet across the table. Celia took it. Inside were comparison charts, issue logs, email confirmations, and a concise cover memo that tied each production slowdown to a specific process change. No insults, no adjectives beyond necessary ones, just cause and effect. In corporate life, the truth lands harder when it is formatted. Blythe looked at me as if I had set her silk scarf on fire. "You have been collecting this?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "because verbal blame tends to evaporate, and records do not." Celia turned pages slowly. That was the longest 5 minutes of Blythe life, and a delightful one in mine. On page 3 was the procurement note Joel had sent warning that licensing terms and security review needed approval before broader adoption. Blythe had replied that executive enthusiasm made delay unacceptable. On page 5 was my follow-up email documenting that I had recommended a limited pilot with rollback criteria. On page 7 was the cycle time chart, a neat, ugly cliff. On page 9 was a list of meetings where Blythe had overridden team leads without technical review. Celia set the packet down. "Blythe, did you bypass a phased launch recommendation?" Blythe straightened. "I made a leadership decision." Celia nodded once. "Without controls." That sentence had a chill to it. In well-run companies, controls are sacred. Not because they are glamorous, but because they keep one overconfident person from setting money on fire and calling it innovation. Blythe shifted toward me. You should have escalated sooner. I almost smiled. I did. In writing. Repeatedly. That landed. Celia asked me to send the full documentation set to operations governance and HR. Then she asked Sam and Mina for supporting notes. Blythe kept trying to interject, but the room had turned. Her certainty, so dazzling in the beginning, now looked like what it had always been. Uninformed arrogance in better tailoring. As the meeting broke, Celia touched the packet again and said, "Good records protect good people." She meant me. Blythe heard it too. I walked back to my desk lighter than I had felt in weeks. Not because justice had finished its work, but because it had finally opened its eyes. And I was not done. I still had one more move. Once upper management saw the evidence, the office changed temperature. Not outwardly. Nobody announced a reckoning over the all-hands channel. No one rang a bell and shouted that Blythe Voss had built a bureaucratic swamp and tried to drown me in it. Corporate revenge, sadly, has fewer trumpets than it deserves. But doors began closing without her. Celia looped in operations governance, internal audit, and the chief product officer. Suddenly there were review sessions, compliance questions, and polite calendar invites, with frighteningly neutral titles. Blythe kept walking around with that brittle smile people wear when they know a floorboard has cracked beneath them, but have not yet decided whether to stand still or run. She chose run. Which meant she tried one last trick. Sometime in the late morning, she sent a summary memo to leadership claiming the team had misunderstood the intended PulseForge configuration and that she had relied on senior developers, meaning me, to guide tactical execution. It was a lovely little attempt at liability transfer. Elegant even. If you enjoy snakes in silk blouses. Unfortunately for her, I had the configuration record. I also had the meeting recap where she overrode the team recommendation for a staged pilot, the email where she refused temporary parallel workflows, and the chat screenshot where she told Sam to stop slowing momentum with infrastructure anxieties. Nothing ruins a revisionist history like its own paper trail. I forwarded the memo to Celia with a short note. This summary conflicts with the documented rollout instructions and approval decisions attached here. Then I attached the whole sparkling chain. That was my revenge, by the way. Not shouting, not sabotage, not a speech in the break room while everyone clutched salad forks in delight. Real revenge is cleaner. You let a careless person collide with the evidence they mocked. By the next day, Celia asked me into a conference room with 2 directors and someone from HR, whose expression suggested she alphabetized danger for sport. Celia spoke plainly. We are suspending the broader rollout, restoring prior workflows where possible, and conducting a management review. I would like your help creating a remediation plan. I had expected relief. I had not expected satisfaction to taste quite so expensive. I can do that, I said. The HR partner asked whether I had felt pressured or retaliated against. Yes, I said. The blame shifted publicly after I raised concerns about measurable delays. That is why I documented every material instruction and change. She nodded. That was wise. Wise. There is a word women do not hear enough when we protect ourselves early rather than nobly waiting to be crushed. Over the following days, I helped rebuild the launch path. We restored direct integrations that PulseForge had interrupted. We cut duplicate approvals. We established a pilot group, measurable success criteria, rollback triggers, and sign-off checkpoints across infrastructure, QA, security, and procurement. In other words, we did the adult version of the job. People started breathing again. My peers were kinder than usual, which in tech means they brought me coffee and sent messages containing more than one complete sentence. Mina leaned against my desk and said, "Watching her try to rewrite history against your documentation was deeply therapeutic." Sam added, "You weaponized professionalism." "I prefer refined self-defense," I said. He laughed. Same blade, nicer handle. Blythe disappeared for 2 days. Then came the announcement. She was no longer with Quantiloom Labs. The message thanked her for her contributions, which was generous in the way obituaries can be generous about difficult relatives. Nobody cried. What surprised me was what came after. Celia asked me to present the remediation plan to senior leadership. Not because I had been wronged, but because I had been right, prepared, and useful under pressure. Competence is memorable. Composure makes it dangerous. As I stood in front of that room, projector humming, I realized something important. Plenty of women are taught to work hard. Far fewer are taught to preserve proof. That omission is expensive. So I gave them the plan, the metrics, and the governance structure. I explained how speed without controls becomes chaos, but controls without practical design become theater. I showed them the cost of insulting subject matter experts. I showed them how one arrogant rollout had shaved time, money, trust, and morale from the company. And for the first time in weeks, every person in the room was listening for the right reason. The funniest part of the whole saga was that I never wanted a throne. I wanted functioning systems, realistic deadlines, and the freedom to do my job without a self-appointed genius stapling chaos to my workflow. Yet sometime in the early morning of the week after Blythe left, Celia called and asked me to step into an interim leadership role while they restructured development operations. I stared at my screen. Then I laughed, not because it was absurd, though it was. Because a woman can spend years solving problems quietly, and the moment she uses the same discipline to defend herself, people suddenly discover leadership potential as if it had washed ashore overnight. I accepted, of course. I am practical, not saintly. The promotion came with more meetings, more visibility, and the delicious privilege of redesigning the exact processes that had nearly been used to pin a disaster on me. I built guardrails that made sense. Every major tool change required a pilot, a written business case, cross-functional sign-off, measurable success criteria, and a rollback path. No executive enthusiasm clause, no vanity shortcuts. If somebody wanted transformation, they could bring data and learn some manners. Productivity recovered faster than finance had predicted. Once the duplicate approvals vanished and teams got sensible handoffs back, our cycle times improved almost immediately. Client confidence steadied. The renewal that had wobbled came through. Celia sent me a 2-line note saying, "Strong recovery. Better leadership." Coming from her, it felt like being knighted by a laser. As for Blythe, office gossip traveled in its usual silk slippers. I heard she had landed elsewhere and was calling Quantiloom resistant to innovation. That suited me fine. Bad managers often leave with the one asset they never earned: certainty. I left with something better: credibility. One evening, after most of the floor had emptied, I sat alone with the city glowing beyond the windows and thought about what had actually saved me. It was not brilliance, not charm, not even speed. Though speed had made me visible. It was the discipline of not trusting memory when stakes were high. At work, people love verbal ambiguity right up until accountability arrives. Then suddenly, nobody recalls the meeting the same way. Nobody approved the shortcut. Nobody said to skip review. That is why records matter. Save the draft. Confirm the call. Keep the comparison. Write the recap while the details still breathe. If someone pressures you to own a choice you did not make, ask for that request in writing and watch how often courage leaves the room. My team changed too. We became less dazzled by noise, more loyal to evidence. Mina started attaching defect trend snapshots to every major QA review. Sam formalized infrastructure risk notes. Joel from procurement, vindicated at last, walked around with the serene air of a man whose warnings had finally been upgraded from nuisance to prophecy. And me? I got wittier. There is something deeply clarifying about surviving an attempted scapegoating with your reputation intact and your antagonist flattened by her own emails. It improves the posture. Sometime in the late afternoon, a junior developer named June stopped by my office and asked how I had stayed so calm when Blythe kept blaming me. I told her the truth. I was not calm, I was prepared. She frowned. What is the difference? Preparation leaves a paper trail, panic leaves a witness. June smiled slowly, like she had just tucked away a tool she would use one day. That felt better than the title, if I am honest. I still write code. I still move faster than most people expect. But now, when a shiny new system arrives wrapped in ego and buzzwords, nobody asks me to clap first. They ask what the controls are, what the pilot says, and who approved the rollback path. That is my kind of revenge. Not destruction. Standards. And in my experience, nothing irritates a sloppy tyrant more than a competent woman with documentation, a long memory, and a perfectly polite email.